Are you an Agatha Christie hater or a die-hard fan? Comment yes or no right now. Subscribe now and tap the notification bell so you'll never miss another mystery from Agatha Christie's world. Today, we uncover one of her most chilling tales, the Lemesurier Inheritance. But first, let me ask you something. Are you a true Agatha Christie fan, or do you secretly think her stories are overrated? Drop a yes or no in the comments. I'd love to know. This story isn't just about a family inheritance. It's about a curse that seems to doom every firstborn son of the Lemesurier family. Each heir meets a mysterious, untimely death. Is it mere coincidence, or something far darker? Fear and superstition take hold as Poirot and Hastings step in, questioning whether fate itself is against the family, or whether someone is cleverly staging a pattern of tragedy. What follows is not just a puzzle of logic, but a haunting exploration of fear, paranoia, and manipulation. And just when you think you know the answer, Poirot delivers a revelation so unexpected that it flips the entire mystery upside down. Let's begin the story. Scene 1. The Curse of the Lemesurier. Among the many unusual cases I have shared with Poirot, few stand out as vividly as the strange affairs of the Lemesurier family. What began as a passing encounter would later grow into one of Poirot's most puzzling investigations, a mystery whispered about in drawing rooms as much as in military mess halls, carried forward by shadows of an ancient curse. It was during the war, not long after Poirot and I had renewed our friendship following our days in Belgium. He had just concluded a sensitive case for the War Office, and that evening we found ourselves enjoying dinner at the Carlton. A senior officer, an ardent admirer of Poirot's skill, had invited us, seizing every opportunity between courses to praise my friend's brilliance. When duty called him away, Poirot and I lingered over our coffee, taking our time before stepping out into the night. As we prepared to leave, a voice called my name, sharp and familiar. Turning, I recognized Captain Vincent Lemesurier, a young officer I had once encountered in France. With him was an older gentleman who bore such a resemblance that the relation was unmistakable. Vincent introduced him as his uncle, Hugo Lemesurier. Vincent had always struck me as thoughtful and reserved, though I knew little about him beyond whispers of his ancient family estate in Northumberland, whose history stretched back before the Reformation. With no pressing obligations, Poirot and I accepted their invitation for a drink. Conversation flowed freely. Hugo, a man in his 40s with the air of an intellectual, spoke about his work in chemical research sanctioned by the government. The evening might have ended there, had not a tall, dark-haired man suddenly approached the table, his manner hurried and uneasy. "Thank goodness I found you both," he exclaimed breathlessly. Vincent turned sharply, alarm flashing across his features. "What has happened, Roger?" he demanded. "It's your father," the young man replied gravely. "A fall. From a young horse. It looks very bad." Within moments, Vincent and Hugo had excused themselves, their departure urgent. The blow was devastating. Vincent's father was not expected to last the night. The captain's pale face betrayed a grief deeper than I would have expected, given his strained relations with his father. Yet his anguish seemed genuine, as though a hidden weight had suddenly pressed upon him. Left behind, Poirot and I found ourselves in the company of Roger Lemesurier, introduced as Vincent's cousin. We strolled together, and he soon turned to Poirot with a conspiratorial air. "This affair may be of interest to you, monsieur," he began. "I've heard of your expertise in psychology. Did you notice Vincent's reaction? His fear runs deeper than sorrow." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "I study the mind, yes." Roger lowered his voice. "It is the family curse. Would you care to hear of it?" With the faintest smile, Poirot agreed. "Roger, finding that his train had not yet departed, began recounting the tale. The Lemurier, he explained, were a family of old nobility, their line stretching back to the Middle Ages. Generations earlier, an ancestor, Baron Hugo Lemurier, grew consumed by jealousy and suspicion. Believing his wife unfaithful, he accused her of bearing a son that was not his. Though she pleaded her innocence, he refused to listen. In a fit of cruelty, he condemned her and the child, some say, by sealing them alive within the walls of the castle. With her dying breath, the woman cursed the family. No firstborn son would ever inherit the estate. The Baron lived to regret his crime, retreating into penitence, donning a hair shirt, and living out his days in monastic austerity. But the curse endured. Generation after generation, the title passed not to eldest sons, but to younger brothers, nephews, or second-born heirs. Vincent's father himself had been the second of 5 brothers, the firstborn lost in infancy. Throughout the war, Vincent had often confided that he believed the curse would fall upon him. Strangely enough, while his 2 younger brothers perished, he survived. To him, that survival was less a blessing than a grim confirmation. When his father passed, he, as the firstborn surviving son, would inherit. Poirot listened carefully, his eyes narrowed with thought. Roger, however, chuckled as if dismissing his own story. "Perhaps the curse cannot keep up with the modern world," he said lightly, checking his watch before hurrying off for his train. Poirot merely frowned at the remark, his disapproval quiet but firm. Yet fate was already moving. The very next day, the news reached us. Captain Vincent Lemurier was dead. The curse, it seemed, had not been broken after all. Trivia question for viewers. Do you believe the Lemurier curse was real, or was it the work of human hands? Answer yes for real curse, no for human plot. Scene 2. The inheritance passes on. The tragedy of Captain Vincent Lemurier's death was explained away by the authorities with grim efficiency. They concluded that while traveling north aboard the Scotch mail train, Vincent had opened the carriage door during the night and hurled himself onto the tracks. To them, it was an act born of despair. The combined weight of his father's accident and the lingering trauma of the war had pushed him into a brief but fatal madness. Yet, for those who knew the family history, the event carried darker undertones. Once more, the old superstition had proven itself. No firstborn son of the Lemurier was ever meant to inherit. With Vincent gone, the estate passed to his uncle, Ronald Lemurier, himself a frail man even at the time of his succession. Ronald's only child, a son, had died years before on the battlefield of the Somme, leaving him without an heir of his own. Poirot and I, perhaps still unsettled by our chance meeting with young Vincent on the very night of his death, could not help but keep a watchful eye on subsequent developments in this ill-fated family. 2 years later, our curiosity sharpened when we read of Ronald's passing. Ill health had always dogged him, and the estate now passed to his younger brother John. Unlike Ronald, John was hearty and strong, with a promising son away at Eton. For a moment, it seemed as though the line of misfortune might at last be broken. But fate, as ever, had other designs. While on holiday, John's son suffered a terrible accident with a firearm, a fatal misadventure that cut short his young life. The blow was cruel enough, yet tragedy struck again when John himself died suddenly from nothing more sinister than a wasp sting, an incident so mundane it only heightened the sense of eerie inevitability. The curse, it seemed, would not loosen its hold. The estate passed once more, this time into the hands of Hugo Lemurier, the very same Hugo whom Poirot and I had first met that evening at the Carlton years before. Up until then, our role in the saga of the Lemurier had been that of distant observers, following reports of misfortune with detached curiosity. That changed one morning when a visitor arrived at Poirot's door. She was tall, striking, and carried herself with brisk confidence. Her voice carried a hint of an American accent. "My name is Mrs. Lemurier," she announced. "My husband, Hugo, met you some years ago. He thought you might not remember." Poirot, with his unfailing memory, smiled. "On the contrary, madame, it was at the Carlton, was it not?" She seemed impressed but wasted no time. "I need your help, monsieur. I am deeply worried." Poirot gestured politely for her to continue. "What troubles you, madam?" "It's about my eldest boy," she said firmly. "I have two sons, Ronald, who is 8, and Gerald, 6. But it is always Ronald who is in danger." Over the past 6 months, she explained, Ronald had survived 3 close calls with death. Once, he nearly drowned on a seaside holiday in Cornwall. On another occasion, he fell from a nursery window. Most recently, he had been poisoned, nearly fatally, by tainted food. Poirot, though outwardly calm, betrayed just enough concern for her to press harder. "I know what you're thinking, that I am some nervous mother making too much of childish accidents. But I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, these are not mere coincidences." Poirot raised a hand gently. "Any mother would be shaken by such events. But I am not God. I cannot control the sea, nor can I prevent accidents from windows. Though," he added pointedly, "iron bars would help. And as for food, nothing equals a mother's vigilance." Her eyes flashed. "But why, monsieur, is it always Ronald? Why never Gerald?" Poirot replied softly, "Chance, perhaps. Mere coincidence." "Do you truly believe that?" she demanded. "Because my husband does not. He shrugs and says it is the curse. And he accepts it, as if his son's death is inevitable." She sighed, her voice tightening. "I am American. We treat curses as old-fashioned legends, entertaining for a moment but nothing more. When I first met Hugo, I was a chorus girl on stage, and I thought his family's curse was the most romantic tale I had ever heard. But romance vanishes when it is your child's life at stake." Poirot leaned closer. "Then you do not believe in this legend?" She met his eyes, her tone sharp. "Can a curse cut through ivy with a knife?" Poirot started, surprised by the intensity of her reply. She went on. "Ronald and Gerald had often climbed the ivy outside the nursery window. One day, while Gerald was away, Ronald tried again, and the ivy gave way. He escaped serious injury, but when she inspected it afterward, she found the stems had been deliberately cut." Poirot's expression hardened. "This is serious indeed. Tell me, madame, what of the poisoning? Was Gerald also home?" "Yes," she admitted reluctantly. "Both boys were there." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And who else resides in your household?" "There is Miss Saunders, the boys' governess, John Gardner, my husband's secretary, and Major Roger Lemurier. He often stays with us. The boys adore him." "Ah, the cousin," Poirot mused. She hesitated. "He isn't directly related to our branch, though I suppose he is Hugo's nearest living relative now. He is charming, playful, and often encourages the boys' mischief. It might even have been Roger who first urged them to climb the ivy." Poirot's gaze sharpened, his tone firm now. "Madame, I must apologize for doubting you earlier. This danger is not imaginary. You must allow Hastings and me to come and stay at your house. The threat to your son is very real." Her relief was tempered with frustration. "My husband will not approve. He thinks nothing can change Ronald's fate. But I cannot sit idly by. If you believe you can help, Monsieur Poirot, then I will welcome you." Poirot inclined his head gravely. Then we shall come, and perhaps together we will prove that curses are not stronger than human will, or human malice. Trivia question for viewers. If you were Mrs. Lemurier, would you believe your son's accidents were just coincidences, yes, or part of a deliberate plot, no? Scene 3. Poirot's investigation begins. Poirot listened with calm attentiveness as Mrs. Lemesurier shared her growing fears. He reassured her gently, reminding her that when one faces a shadow of danger, the wisest response is not panic, but careful preparation. The following morning, our arrangements complete, we set out northward to the family estate. The journey was quiet, and Poirot spent much of the time gazing absently out of the window, lost in thought. Then, quite suddenly, he stirred, his sharp voice breaking the silence. It was from a train such as this, Hastings, that Captain Vincent Lemesurier met his untimely death. His deliberate stress on the word fell carried more weight than the casual observation it appeared to be. I turned in my seat, surprised. Surely, Poirot, you don't suspect foul play in that matter. He gave me a measured look, the kind that suggested his mind was already 10 steps ahead. Have you considered, my friend, that these deaths may not be accidents at all? Vincent's fall, the little boy's tragic tumble from a nursery window, how convenient that each supposed mishap clears the way for another heir. But tell me, Hastings, would a child of 7 truly be capable of benefiting from such events? Absurd, n'est-ce pas? I hesitated, then offered. Perhaps the intention was to remove the younger child as well. Poirot shook his head with quiet dissatisfaction. No, that explanation does not satisfy me. Remember also the case of the illness, atropine poisoning, Hastings. Such symptoms can appear quite natural, yet behind them may lie a calculating hand. Yes, yes. Our presence here is essential. Upon our arrival at the estate, Mrs. Lemesurier greeted us warmly, ushering us into her husband's study. Hugo Lemesurier appeared greatly altered since our last meeting. His shoulders stooped, his complexion waxy and pale, and there was a weary heaviness in his eyes. Poirot carefully explained our concerns, and Hugo listened with the air of a man resigned to fate. My dear Poirot, he said at last, forcing a faint smile, you speak with the same practical wisdom as my wife, and I appreciate your care, but the truth is, what is destined cannot be avoided. None of us can outrun the curse of the Lemesuriers. Poirot, ever probing, mentioned the strange case of the cut ivy that had raised suspicions. Hugo only shrugged, brushing it off as the careless act of a gardener. Perhaps there is a human hand in some of these tragedies, he admitted, but ultimately it is the curse that governs our end. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And why, monsieur, do you believe the end is so near? A shadow crossed Hugo's face. He sighed deeply before confessing, because my own time is nearly finished. The doctors have told me there is no cure. My health fails with each passing day. Before I go, Ronald too will be claimed, and then Gerald will inherit. Poirot pressed quietly. And if something should happen to Gerald? Nothing will happen to him, Hugo insisted with sudden firmness. But when Poirot continued to hold his gaze, Hugo relented with a sigh. If fate should strike again, then the estate would pass to my cousin Roger. Their conversation ended abruptly, with the entrance of a tall, broad-shouldered man carrying a stack of documents. His copper-colored curls caught the light, giving him an oddly striking presence. Hugo waved him away impatiently. Not now, Gardner, later. Turning to us, he said, This is John Gardner, my secretary. Gardner bowed politely, exchanging a few pleasant words before excusing himself. Yet something about him unsettled me, a charm that felt too polished, too rehearsed. Later, I mentioned my unease to Poirot as we strolled across the grounds. To my surprise, he agreed. "You are right, Hastings. The man is too smooth, too handsome, too eager for the easy road. I do not trust him." Our reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Lemesurier with her 2 sons. Ronald, the elder, bore the same auburn curls as his cousin Roger, while Gerald, darker and quieter, resembled his mother. The boys were curious and polite at first, but within minutes they were enchanted by Poirot, their laughter echoing across the lawns. Soon after, we made the acquaintance of Miss Saunders, their governess. She was a plain, almost forgettable woman who seemed accustomed to being overlooked. Life at the estate unfolded calmly for several days. Too calmly. Poirot remained ever alert, though nothing unusual presented itself. On the 4th day, Major Roger Lemesurier arrived. As genial as ever, he was light-hearted and amiable, playing with the boys as though he had no care in the world. Poirot, however, observed him keenly, never taking his eyes from the interactions. The following afternoon, Lady Claygate invited the family for tea at her nearby estate. Mrs. Lemesurier encouraged us to attend, but Poirot declined, choosing instead to remain behind. He spent the hours in quiet but relentless activity, inspecting corners of the house with painstaking precision. When at last he rejoined me, his expression was clouded, as though he had failed to uncover some elusive detail. That evening, while we sat on the terrace, Miss Saunders, who had not gone to Lady Claygate's, joined us for tea. Stirring her cup absently, she remarked, "The boys will enjoy themselves, though I hope they behave. They mustn't disturb Lady Claygate's bees." The effect on Poirot was immediate and startling. He froze mid-sip, his eyes blazing with sudden intensity. "Bees?" he repeated, his voice sharp as a knife. "Yes," she said, blinking in confusion. "Lady Claygate is very proud of her hives. She keeps 3 of them." Poirot leapt to his feet, pacing in agitation, his hands pressed to his temples. Never had I seen him so shaken by something so seemingly trivial. At that moment, the family car returned from the outing. Gerald bounded up the steps, calling out excitedly, "Ronald was stung, but he's fine, just a little sting." Mrs. Lemesurier reassured us with a gentle smile. "We applied ammonia at once, there's hardly any swelling." Poirot stepped forward immediately. "Let me see, my little friend," he said softly. Ronald, proud of his adventure, pointed to a small mark on the side of his neck. Poirot examined the spot closely. Though he said little, the darkening in his eyes and the tense line of his jaw told me all I needed to know. Something in that harmless sting had given him the key to the mystery. Trivia question. If you were in Poirot's place, would you believe in the family curse, or would you suspect a human hand behind the tragedies? Scene 4. The bee sting incident. The garden that afternoon seemed peaceful, but beneath the calm lingered unease. As Ronald stood on the terrace, his father noticed a bee hovering dangerously close. "Don't move, my boy," Hugo whispered. "There's one on you." The child obeyed, standing perfectly still as his father brushed at the insect. But before it could be swept away, the bee stung him. Ronald winced slightly but straightened with pride. "It didn't really hurt," he announced. "Only like a pinprick. And I didn't cry, I'm big now. Next year I'll be at school." His courage was touching, but Poirot's reaction unsettled me. The detective leaned in, examining the red mark on the boy's neck with great care. His expression when he straightened was unreadable, calm, but shadowed with gravity. He slipped his arm through mine as we walked back inside. In a low voice he murmured, "Tonight, mon ami, we attend to a very delicate affair. Say nothing to anyone. I pressed for details, but Poirot only shook his head, his lips firmly sealed. The mystery gnawed at me all evening until at last he retired early. I followed soon after, only to feel his hand grip my sleeve as I passed. His voice was hushed and urgent. "Do not undress, Hastings. Wait a short while, then extinguish your lamp and come to me." I obeyed, returning quietly at the appointed time. Poirot was waiting, his finger raised for silence. Together we moved along the dim corridor, each step measured and soundless. He guided me to the nursery wing where Ronald slept in a small bedroom of his own. Inside, the boy lay unnaturally still, his breathing heavy, slow, almost drugged. "He sleeps too deeply," I whispered uneasily. "Drugged," Poirot muttered grimly. "So he will not wake." Before I could reply, a faint scrape sounded at the door. Poirot motioned me into the shadows. The handle turned with dreadful quiet, and a figure slipped into the room. Whoever it was moved with shallow, rapid breaths, their hands trembling as they set down a small electric lantern. Its dim glow fell upon the boy's bed. I watched in horror as the intruder produced a syringe, bending close to Ronald's neck. In an instant, Poirot sprang forward, and I leapt with him. The lantern toppled, plunging the room into semi-darkness as the struggle began. Our opponent fought with astonishing strength, clawing and twisting to break free, but at last we forced him down. "Quick, Hastings, the light!" Poirot gasped, holding the man pinned. My foot found the lantern, and I fumbled for the switch. When the beam cut across the intruder's face, my breath caught in disbelief. "Impossible," I whispered, almost dropping the lantern. It was no servant, no secretary. It was Hugo Lemesurier himself, the father who had spoken so often of fate and the family curse. Now, unconscious, he lay sprawled before us. We carried him back to his own chamber and laid him on the bed. Poirot bent over his clenched hand and carefully pried free the syringe. Holding it up, he said gravely, "Formic acid, Hastings, distilled from ants. Death would have seemed the work of a bee sting." The horror struck me cold. My God, his own son. Poirot's voice was quiet, steady, yet heavy with sorrow. "Oui, he has lost his reason. A brilliant chemist once, but now, driven by madness. The curse, Hastings, was never written in the stars. It was in the heart of a man." Trivia question for engagement. If you had been in Hastings' place that night, would you have suspected Hugo Lemesurier? Or would your suspicion have fallen on someone else in the household? Scene 5. Caught in the act. Poirot sat in silence for some time, his fingertips pressed together, his gaze fixed on nothing. At last, he spoke with a weight that chilled me. "The so-called curse, Hastings. It was never the hand of fate. It was the hand of Hugo Lemesurier. The family history consumed him. It twisted into an obsession, a fixation that slowly poisoned his mind. To him, every misfortune was not merely chance, but destiny that had to be preserved. He could not bear to see the prophecy broken." I stared at him, appalled, as he continued in his measured, deliberate voice. "Think back. When Vincent traveled north that night, Hugo was with him. Vincent was heir to the estate. If his father lived through his accident, the curse would be disproven. Hugo could not allow that. His solution was simple. Vincent must not survive. Later, when Ronald inherited, Hugo saw new obstacles. His own brother John stood in the way, a man hale and hearty, with a son at his side. Yet John too met a sudden and mysterious end. A wasp's sting, they said. Poirot's eyes narrowed. But it was no insect. Hugo had already perfected his weapon, a subtle injection of formic acid disguised as a natural death. A shiver ran down my spine. So it was murder, methodical, deliberate and hidden behind the family's tragic reputation. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, each incident wrapped in the veil of accident or superstition. The drowning, the fall from the nursery, the poison in the food, all carefully staged. But there is a difference between cold calculation and the chaos of a fractured mind. At first, he was cunning, precise. In time, obsession consumed him and he lost control. By then, it was no longer about ambition. It was madness masquerading as destiny. I swallowed hard. And to think I suspected Roger, such a decent fellow. Poirot gave a small shrug. It was not unreasonable, mon ami. Roger too travelled north with Vincent, and after Hugo he was next in line to inherit. By motive alone, suspicion was justified. But facts, Hastings, facts are what matter. Roger never placed both boys in peril. Ronald was always the target. Roger never tampered with Ivy, nor laced the child's food. And when the bee sting was mentioned, I realized at once. It was Hugo who supplied the story, not the boy himself. That reminded me of John's death, also said to be the work of a sting. In that instant, the truth was clear. The weight of his words settled over me. So the curse was nothing more than the design of a desperate man. Poirot's expression softened, though sadness lingered in his eyes. Hugo Lemesurier was declared insane, confined to a private asylum where he died not long after. His tragedy, Hastings, was that he allowed superstition to rule his heart until reason and compassion withered away. And his widow? I asked quietly. She found new happiness, Poirot said with a small smile. The following year she married again, John Gardner, the secretary. As for Ronald, the child who had survived every attempt on his life, he lived to inherit the estate and grew into a fine man. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then the curse was broken after all. Poirot did not answer at once. Instead, he regarded me with that peculiar expression he wore when teasing some hidden thought. Was it broken? He said at last. I wonder. Tell me, Hastings, what color was young Ronald's hair? I frowned, puzzled. His hair? Why, it was red. Just so, said Poirot, his tone mysterious. The matter might have ended there, but days later, I found myself at my desk, grumbling over my overdraft. No matter what I do, Poirot, the figures never improve, I sighed. He looked scandalized. You can sleep at night with such a thing? Mon ami, if I were overdrawn, I would lie awake till dawn. I laughed. Your balance must always be tidy and symmetrical, no doubt. Poirot leaned back, clearly pleased. £444, 4 shillings and 4 pence, a most satisfying sum, perfectly harmonious. I shook my head in amusement. You really are incorrigible. Why not invest in something profitable? There's talk of porcupine oil fields. Dividends of 100%, they claim. He waved the suggestion away with disdain. Bah! I prefer certainty. Government bonds, consols, investments with steady return. Sensation does not interest me. I arched a brow. Surely you've speculated once in your life. His eyes gleamed with mischief. No, Hastings, never. But I do hold shares which are not of the so-called gilt-edged variety. 14,000 shares in the Burma Mines. My jaw dropped. 14,000! How on earth? Poirot's lips curved into a smile. I did not pay a penny for them, mon ami. They were earned by the labor of my little grey cells, and if you are patient, I shall tell you the story, for it all began, not with money, but with a missing mine. Trivia, question for engagement. If you were Poirot, would you have suspected Roger Lemesurier or John Gardner before uncovering the truth about Hugo? Scene 6. The horrifying truth. The story of the Burma Mines stretched back centuries. Originally uncovered by the Chinese in the 15th century, the mines had produced rich veins of silver-lead ore. The silver was carefully refined, while the leftover slag still contained vast quantities of valuable lead. Generations of workers had toiled in these shafts until, in 1868, the Mohammedan rebellion forced their abandonment. Over the years, the mines became flooded and choked with rubble, making them nearly impossible to reopen. When European prospectors later arrived, they realized the immense potential locked away in the slag. Syndicates and companies formed, each desperate to rediscover the original ore body. Yet, despite countless expeditions and furious digging across wide stretches of land, the treasure of Burma's interior remained hidden. Hope flared again when one company's representative uncovered a crucial lead. A Chinese family, long rumored to possess ancient records detailing the exact site of the mine. At the head of this family was Wu Ling, a respected merchant whose reputation carried weight in his province. When approached, Wu Ling confirmed that he did indeed hold the documents, but insisted he would negotiate only with the firm's principal directors. Thus, it was arranged for him to travel to England and deal directly with the company's board. Wu Ling's voyage took him aboard the SS Assunta, which arrived at Southampton on a bleak November morning thick with fog. One of the company's directors, Mr. Pearson, had planned to meet him, but was delayed when trains were slowed by the mist. By the time Pearson reached the docks, Wu Ling had already disembarked and taken a special train to London. Later that day, the company received a reassuring call from Wu Ling himself. He explained that he was staying at the Russell Square Hotel, admitted to feeling somewhat unwell after his journey, but promised to attend the scheduled board meeting the following morning. The appointment was set for 11 o'clock. Yet, by 11:30, there was still no sign of Wu Ling. Concerned, the secretary telephoned the hotel, only to hear troubling news. Wu Ling had left at 10:30, accompanied by a visitor. At first, it was assumed he had simply become lost in the labyrinth of London. But as the hours passed and he did not return, unease hardened into alarm. By nightfall, Pearson went to the police. 2 days later, Wu Ling's body was dragged from the waters of the Thames. The discovery was devastating. Even more shocking was the absence of the documents, neither among his belongings at the hotel nor on his person. The papers had vanished. Mr. Pearson, horrified but desperate, sought my help. While the police focused on the murder itself, Pearson's main concern was the recovery of those priceless records. I agreed to investigate, seeing two possible paths. First, to look into company insiders who knew of Wu Ling's mission, and second, to scrutinize passengers aboard the Assunta. Inspector Miller, the officer in charge, was inclined to pursue the latter. Miller was a brash and overbearing man, not at all to my taste, but we were obliged to cooperate. Initial questioning of the ship's officers revealed little. Wu Ling had kept to himself throughout the voyage. He had, however, conversed with two passengers, a European known as Dyer, a shady figure rumored to be entangled with Chinese criminal gangs, and Charles Lester, a young bank clerk returning from Hong Kong. Both men seemed plausible suspects, though Dyer appeared the more obvious of the two. Fortunately, we obtained photographs of them and brought them to the Russell Square Hotel for identification. The hall porter dismissed Dyer's image outright. He was certain this was not the man who had collected Wu Ling. Almost as an afterthought, I produced Lester's photograph. The recognition was immediate. "Yes, sir," the porter declared confidently. "That's the gentleman. He came around 10:30, asked for Mr. Wu Ling, and they left together." It was a breakthrough. Confronting Lester became our next priority. When we found him, he did not cower or evade. On the contrary, he appeared genuinely shocked at the news of Wu Ling's death. He answered our questions freely and declared himself at our disposal. According to his account, he and Wu Ling had agreed to meet at the hotel that morning, But Wu Ling had never arrived. The contradiction between Lester's testimony and the porter's certainty hung in the air like smoke. Something was not right. Trivia question for viewers. If you were Poirot, who would you consider the more suspicious figure at this point? The shady European dyer or the respectable bank clerk, Charles Lester? Scene 7. Hugo's madness and downfall. Charles Lester's explanation seemed straightforward at first. He claimed that on the morning of Wu Ling's disappearance, a servant had arrived at the hotel in his master's place. The man allegedly explained that Wu Ling had been called away unexpectedly, but would receive Lester at another location. Without hesitation, Lester agreed to go along. They hailed a taxi, and for a while the cab made its way toward the docks. Yet, as the journey continued, Lester admitted he grew increasingly uneasy. Something in the servant's manner raised his suspicions. Acting on sudden instinct, he ordered the driver to halt and got out, brushing aside the servant's protests. That, Lester insisted, was the entirety of his knowledge about the matter. It was a plausible tale, too plausible. At first, we thanked him for his cooperation, but soon, troubling cracks began to appear in his story. Our inquiries confirmed that Wu Ling had not been accompanied by any servant, neither during the voyage on the Assunta nor after his arrival at the Russell Square Hotel. The supposed servant existed only in Lester's imagination or his deceit. Then came the testimony that unraveled his narrative completely. The taxi driver, tracked down after some effort, recalled vividly the ride in question. According to him, Lester had not left the cab midway at all. Instead, both passengers were driven directly to a notorious establishment in Limehouse, a squalid den long associated with vice and opium. The driver saw them enter together. Yet only one man emerged, Lester. He had appeared pale, shaken, his expression disturbed. Without a word, he ordered the driver to take him straight to the nearest underground station. From that moment, suspicion closed in around him. Digging into his past, we uncovered a darker portrait. Though Lester maintained the image of a respectable bank clerk, beneath the surface, he was drowning in debts and entangled in a ruinous gambling habit. His polished exterior masked the desperation of a man with much to lose and even more to gain from theft. Of course, Dyer, the shady European traveler with his ties to Chinese criminal circles, remained on our list of suspects. For a time, it was even considered that he might have impersonated Lester in order to cast suspicion upon him. But once his alibi was checked, it proved ironclad. On the day of Wu Ling's disappearance, Dyer was accounted for from morning to night, leaving no possibility of his involvement. As for the Limehouse proprietor, his answers were slippery and defiant. He denied any knowledge of Lester, Wu Ling, or their visit, and with an insolent air even claimed no opium was ever smoked on his premises. His lies fooled no one, but nothing tangible could be pinned to him. When the police raided the building, they uncovered no incriminating evidence, no opium, no trace of Wu Ling, no papers connected to the Burma Mines. Lester, however, was not so fortunate. With the cab driver's testimony damning him, his background riddled with suspicion, and no credible explanation for his actions, he was arrested. Yet despite an exhaustive search of his rooms and personal effects, the vital documents remained missing. Mr. Pearson, already a man of nervous energy, became almost frantic. He stormed about my lodgings, wringing his hands, his voice climbing in agitation. "But surely, Monsieur Poirot, you must have some theory, some plan. We cannot simply sit idle." "On the contrary," I replied with composure, "we must sit very still indeed. For too many theories, my friend, can lead one into too many errors." He pressed me relentlessly. "For instance?" I raised a finger. Consider first the testimony of the taxi driver. We have only his word that Lester and Wu Ling entered that Limehouse house. What if, instead, the house served merely as a passage? What if the pair emerged at the other side and continued elsewhere? That possibility cannot be dismissed. Pearson stopped pacing, struck by the suggestion, but his impatience returned almost immediately. But what use is sitting here and thinking, man? Action is required. Alas, he was an Englishman through and through, energetic, impulsive, reckless. I had to restrain him. Poirot does not dash about Limehouse like a terrier, I said firmly. Calm, order and method, that is how truth is uncovered. Already my agents are at work. Indeed, the very next day my suspicions were confirmed. A reliable report reached me. The Limehouse house had been nothing more than a convenient cover. Its hidden back passage opened onto another street, where a discreet eating house stood by the river. There the two men had been seen entering together, and once again, as before, only one man had emerged, Lester. This revelation sent Pearson into a frenzy of determination. His mind seized upon an idea both reckless and absurd. He demanded that we investigate the eating house personally, even speaking wildly of disguises. Worse, in a moment of lunacy, he dared to suggest that I, Hercule Poirot, might shave my moustache to better blend into the shadows of Limehouse. The very notion made me shudder. A moustache such as mine is not shaved away like an unwanted weed, I declared, horrified. Besides, why should a Belgian gentleman not enter an eating house with dignity, as well as with a moustache? Pearson laughed, but would not relent. He insisted on carrying out his scheme, and that very evening he presented himself in what he proudly described as disguise. His chin was smeared with grime, his jaw unshaven, a reeking scarf wrapped about his neck, and a rough pea jacket upon his shoulders. He was enormously pleased with himself. To me, he looked not so much a cunning spy as an Englishman gone quite mad. With great reluctance, I allowed him to adjust my appearance slightly, but only slightly, for the moustache at least remained sacred. Trivia question for viewers. If you were Poirot, would you shave your moustache for the sake of disguise, yes or no? Scene 8. The case is closed. Arguing with Pearson when he was swept away by excitement was utterly pointless. I knew from the outset that letting him wander off alone would only end in disaster. He reminded me of an overgrown child, desperate to play dress-up in a game he didn't fully understand, and so, against my better judgment, I accompanied him on this unusual expedition. Our destination was as dubious as his plan. The moment we stepped inside the dimly lit establishment, I realized we were far from ordinary company. The cramped room overflowed with Chinese patrons, the atmosphere heavy with unfamiliar scents. The food placed before us looked questionable at best, and my suspicions were confirmed the moment my stomach reacted with fierce disapproval. It was then that the proprietor appeared, his thin smile unsettling in its permanence. "You gentlemen no likey food here?" he asked smoothly, his tone suggesting more than idle curiosity. "Perhaps something better?" Pearson, ever the dramatist, immediately slipped into his performance. Beneath the table, he delivered a sharp kick to my shins, nearly making me yelp aloud. Then, with the exaggerated ease of a seasoned actor, he declared, "I don't mind if I do." The code had been given. We were led away through a winding route, down a narrow cellar, through a trapdoor, then up into a more lavishly decorated chamber. Soft divans lined the walls, thick curtains muted the light, and attendants soon arrived bearing opium pipes with a rehearsed grace. Playing our roles, we pretended to partake. We inhaled just enough to simulate drowsiness, collapsing into cushions as if surrendering to a dream. Once our act convinced the attendants, Pearson whispered urgently, and together we began crawling across the floor, slipping from one shadowy chamber to the next. The deeper we went, the more the air reeked of smoke and despair. Through a heavy curtain, we finally overheard hushed voices. "What about the papers?" one man asked. His accent was distinctly European. The other, whose Chinese inflection was unmistakable, replied, "Mr. Lester, he takey them. Say he put safe where policemen no find." "But Lester is arrested," the first man countered. "Not sure," came the reply. "He free. Police not certain he guilty." We strained to catch more, but the men shifted in our direction. With the quick reflexes of cornered prey, Pearson and I retreated, returning to our cushions and feigning the stupor of intoxication. Minutes dragged by until, at last, it was safe enough to make our exit. A bribe was discreetly handed over for our supposed indulgence, and we stepped out into the fog of Limehouse, grateful for the night air. "Thank heavens that's over," Pearson admitted, his bravado slipping at last. "Indeed," I muttered, though my mind still whirled with unanswered questions. But Poirot, calm as ever, broke the silence with a startling observation. The missing papers, he revealed, had never been misplaced. They were in Pearson's own pocket all along. My bafflement must have been written plain across my face, for Poirot softened his tone as if explaining arithmetic to a slow pupil. Pearson, it seemed, was far from the naive thrill-seeker he pretended to be. Drowning in gambling debts and desperate for money, he had concocted the entire scheme. He orchestrated Wu Ling's journey to London, led him to Limehouse, and arranged for his Chinese acquaintances to impersonate the man. His initial idea was simple: sell the documents using Wu Ling's double, then vanish. Murder, however, had not been part of his plan. His accomplices, seeking a quicker resolution, had taken matters into their own hands. Panicked and cornered, Pearson scrambled for an alibi. He used Charles Lester as a decoy, ensuring the poor man was drugged and left with a foggy memory that would implicate him further. For a time, the ruse worked. Inspector Miller, stubborn as ever, was convinced of Lester's guilt, but Poirot saw through the charade. By morning, the truth had surfaced. The stolen documents were recovered, and Pearson's game collapsed entirely. With a sigh, Poirot admitted that the most taxing part of the affair was persuading Inspector Miller to abandon his false theory. Miller, of course, still managed to take credit for the arrest, much to my indignation. Yet Poirot merely chuckled, satisfied with his quiet reward, 14,000 shares in the Burma Mines, graciously gifted by the grateful directors. With that, he gave me a final word of advice, his eyes twinkling with irony: always be cautious where investments are concerned. The men paraded in newspapers may not be what they seem. There are more Pearsons in this world than one would care to imagine. Trivia. Question for viewers. Would you have trusted Pearson if you were in Hastings' place? Yes or no? Chapter by chapter or scene by scene analysis. Scene 1. The Curse of the Lemesurier. The opening sets a chilling tone, introducing us to the shadowed history of the Lemesurier family. During a chance encounter at the Carlton, Hastings and Poirot meet Captain Vincent Lemesurier and his uncle Hugo, just as news arrives that Vincent's father has been fatally injured. What seems at first a family tragedy deepens when cousin Roger reveals the legend. No firstborn son of the Lemesuriers has ever inherited the estate, thanks to an ancestral curse dating back to a jealous baron's cruelty. Vincent himself fears he is next. His dread proves justified when, almost immediately, word comes of his sudden death. Insight and lesson. This chapter shows how fear and superstition can prey on the mind, shaping actions and destinies. we learn that belief in fate can be just as dangerous as fate itself. The theme is fear as prophecy. Viewer question: do you think the so-called curse was a supernatural force, or do you suspect human hands were already at work? Scene 2. The inheritance passes on. The family misfortunes unfold like clockwork. Vincent's suicide aboard a train is chalked up to despair, but Poirot remains unconvinced. The estate shifts from one heir to the next: Ronald, John, then Hugo, each struck down by unlikely misfortune, from accidents to wasp stings. When Hugo's American wife seeks Poirot's help, her fears crystallize around their eldest son Ronald, who has survived a series of suspicious accidents. Most chilling is her discovery that the ivy Ronald used to climb had been deliberately cut. Poirot recognizes that beneath whispers of curses lies something far more deliberate: insight and lesson. We see how blind acceptance of superstition leaves people vulnerable. Mrs. Lemesurier's refusal to surrender to fatalism reflects resilience and maternal courage. The moral: question legends, seek facts. Viewer question: if you were Mrs. Lemesurier, would you believe the accidents were coincidences, or would you suspect someone wanted her son dead? Scene 3. Poirot's investigation begins. Poirot travels to the Lemesurier estate and immediately senses that all is not well. Hugo appears resigned to the curse, his health failing, his faith in superstition unshakable. Poirot notices the danger Ronald faces is not random. Ivy stems had been cut, food poisoned, and incidents staged to look accidental. He observes the household: Hugo, the governess Miss Saunders, secretary John Gardner, and cousin Roger. Poirot's attention sharpens when bees are mentioned, recalling another family death blamed on a sting. When Ronald is actually stung, Poirot's reaction is electric. This accident provides the key he has been waiting for. Insight and lesson. Poirot demonstrates that even the smallest details, a bee sting, can unlock a mystery. The chapter's lesson is truth hides in overlooked details. Viewer question: faced with these events, would you be convinced by the idea of a curse, or would you look for a murderer in the household? Scene 4. The bee sting incident. That night, Poirot proves his suspicions correct. Ronald, drugged into unnatural slumber, becomes the target of a shadowy intruder. Poirot and Hastings spring from hiding and catch the would-be murderer, Hugo himself, Ronald's father. A syringe of formic acid, meant to mimic a fatal bee sting, is found in his hand. The so-called curse was a mask for Hugo's madness. Obsessed with the idea of fate, he became both the architect and executioner of the family's tragedies. Insight and lesson. This chapter warns against the dangers of obsession. Hugo surrendered to superstition until it warped into delusion, pushing him to kill those he loved. The theme: superstition can become self-fulfilling madness. Viewer question: would you ever have suspected Hugo, or would you have focused your suspicions on outsiders like Roger or the secretary? Scene 5. Caught in the act. Poirot explains how Hugo systematically staged each accident. From Vincent's supposed fall to John's mysterious wasp sting, all were carefully engineered by Hugo's chemical expertise. What began as cunning murders turned into uncontrollable obsession. Even Roger, who seemed suspicious by position, was innocent. His actions never aligned with the pattern of attempts. Ultimately, Hugo was declared insane and confined to an asylum, where he died. His wife later remarried, and young Ronald grew to inherit the estate safely. Poirot closes with a final ironic twist about Ronald's red hair, a subtle question about lineage that Poirot leaves deliberately open. Insight and lesson. The narrative illustrates that evil can cloak itself in tradition and superstition, but facts dismantle myths. The moral, madness can be more dangerous than any curse. Viewer. Question: before Poirot's reveal, would you have blamed Roger or Gardner for the attempts on Ronald's life? Scene 6. The Burma Mines case emerges. Seamlessly, the narrative shifts into another mystery tied to Poirot's eventual reward, shares in the Burma Mines. This case follows the murder of Wu Ling, a Chinese merchant carrying vital mining documents, and his disappearance in London. Suspicion falls on two ship passengers, Dyer and Charles Lester. Though Dyer appears the obvious villain, evidence points toward Lester. But inconsistencies in testimony raise troubling questions. Insight and lesson. Poirot shows patience when others rush to judgment. The moral: jumping to conclusions blinds us to hidden truths. Viewer. Question: at this stage, who would you suspect more? Dyer with his criminal reputation, or Lester with his contradictions? Scene 7. Deceptions in Limehouse. Lester's tale of being misled by a servant collapses when witnesses place him in Limehouse with Wu Ling. Poirot uncovers that Lester, though outwardly respectable, was drowning in debts and gambling losses. The Limehouse house serves only as a passage to another hideout, but Lester is increasingly exposed as a liar. Pearson, impatient and reckless, insists on disguises and amateur espionage to Poirot's irritation. Despite the comedy of Pearson's acting, the case tightens around Lester. Insight and lesson. Reputation means little when facts reveal character. The theme is desperation drives deception. Viewer. Question: if you were Poirot, would you have trusted Lester's explanation or doubted him from the start? Scene 8. The case is closed. The final scene unmasks the true culprit, not Lester, but Pearson himself. Behind his bumbling exterior lay desperation and greed. Pearson manipulated everyone, even using Lester as a decoy, while scheming to profit from Wu Ling's stolen documents. Poirot exposes him, secures justice, and earns his reward in Burma Mines shares. The mystery closes with Poirot's characteristic humor and precision, contrasting Hastings' bemusement with Poirot's satisfaction in symmetry. Insight and lesson. The greatest danger often comes from those who appear harmless. Pearson's naive enthusiasm was a mask for cunning betrayal. The morale: beware those who hide their schemes behind charm and playfulness. Viewer. Question: would you have trusted Pearson, or sensed that his eagerness was a disguise for something darker? At the center of the tale stands Hercule Poirot, whose sharp reasoning dismantles the myth of a family curse and exposes the human hand behind tragedy. His loyal companion, Captain Hastings, serves as both witness and commentator, capturing the contrast between superstition and logic. The story begins with Captain Vincent Lemesurier, a young officer burdened by the knowledge that no heir of his family has ever lived to inherit. His sudden death sets the mystery in motion. Beside him is Hugo Lemesurier, Vincent's uncle, outwardly a man resigned to fate, but secretly the orchestrator of each carefully staged accident. His American wife, Mrs. Hugo Lemesurier, provides the emotional core, determined to protect her son Ronald from the supposed curse. Ronald Lemesurier, the child heir, becomes the central target of the schemes, his narrow escapes intensifying the suspense. Supporting figures include Roger Leurier, a cousin whose apparent suspicion proves misleading, and Miss Saunders, the governess who quietly oversees Ronald, yet unwittingly finds herself part of the tense household dynamic. The secretary John Gardner also appears, though his role is more atmospheric, reflecting the aura of secrecy around the estate. The later case introduces new faces: Wu Ling, the Chinese merchant whose murder in London sparks the Burma Mines investigation, and Charles Lester, a man entangled in debt and deception, whose shifting testimony draws scrutiny. Dyer, a figure with a criminal reputation, serves as a convenient suspect, though ultimately a red herring. Finally, Pearson, first dismissed as a bumbling enthusiast, emerges as the true villain, his eagerness concealing a calculated plan for gain. Final thought. In the end, the Lemesurier Inheritance demonstrates how fear and superstition can become as deadly as any weapon. For generations, the family lived under the shadow of a supposed curse, but Christie reminds us that the real danger was not fate, but human obsession. Hugo's descent into madness, disguised as loyalty to tradition, nearly destroyed those closest to him. And in the Burma Mines case, the lesson repeats in another form. Trusting appearances blinds us to hidden motives, while patience and precision reveal the truth. Christie leaves us with the idea that what we call curses are often the designs of desperate men, and only clear thinking can break their hold. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Christie's web of deceit and irony. Do you think the Lemesurier curse was ever real, or just a cover for human cruelty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know your perspective. And if you enjoy exploring mysteries where reason triumphs over superstition, be sure to subscribe now. Each week, we unravel another story where Christie proves that even the darkest secrets can be brought into the light.